Itachi was a man of great conviction, selfless lifestyle, and humble loyalty to his people. He was a prodigy in the art of ninjutsu, and even at such a young age had what it took to be Hokage, a goal he shared with many in the village. The difference between Itachi and his peers, though, was that he could have achieved his dream if he was given the time. Circumstances and people of power stunted his growth and robbed him of his destiny by people merely treating him as a pawn to be thrown away. Was it fair? No. Did Itachi whine about it? No, he did not. A true shinobi to the core, he understood what it meant to be a ninja, but there are so many tragic things that result from this. While we know that Itachi had what it took to make it, had these skills and talents not seen but once in a generation, we also know that fate crapped all over him, catching him between conflict after conflict before deciding for one last screw you by giving him an incurable illness which would later claim his life. But one of the most tragic things about his life was his romantic life. Many of you don't know this, but Itachi was in love. As all things are taken away from him, one mercy is granted. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. Itachi knew a girl from his academy days and beyond who was one of the few people besides his family and Shisui that he actually kept close by. Her name was Izumi, and while she was an Uchiha, she was only Uchiha on her mother's side, and because of that, they lived away from the clan until her father's eventual death during the Nine-Tailed Fox's attack. Her inability to protect him led to her awakening of the Sharingan at a young age, something Itachi admired. When her father passed, she, along with her mother, Hazuki Uchiha, decided to live in the Uchiha compound with the rest of the clan. While there, she, like so many other girls, developed an interest in the kind and gentle Itachi, and she measured herself up to him in every way, hoping to be as strong. But sadly, she could not keep up with his raw talent and slowly fell behind. This would hurt her feelings, and when Itachi dared suggest that she would stop troubling herself with helping everyone due to her weakness, she was only hurt. Of course, Itachi was not a mean child, he was just very blunt. He didn't like to beat around bushes or waste time when talking, having enough respect for people that he would just tell them the harsh truth from the beginning so they could cope quicker. The concept of ripping off a band-aid quickly. Even still, she loved him. It was all she could do. On many occasions, she was Itachi's confidant, helping him with issues and in turn being helped. There was one particular matter he refused to open up about. Upon becoming a genin, he was allowed into the Uchiha clan meetings, which resulted in him learning of the plot to overthrow Konoha. Izumi did not know as she was still in the academy at the time, but when she asked him what went on in there, he immediately closed off and refused to speak to her the rest of that day, telling her not to ask about it again. Of course, she would eventually come to learn herself upon reaching genin level, and when Itachi and Shisui made it their goal to dissuade the Uchiha, Izumi was there too. She would follow him everywhere. When he was driven out of the meetings and accused of being a snitch and traitor, she would follow him out. He would tell her not to, as he didn't want her to be viewed as an outsider to the clan as well, but she stayed close by. She never knew what would happen next. Itachi did though. Using not his Sharingan, but his own wisdom and intelligence, he saw it coming from a mile away. The Uchiha needed to be put down, and it was Danzo who commanded him to do it. On one cold night, he stepped into his clan's compound. A knot in his throat, a rock in his stomach, he allowed the one he dubbed Madara to deal with most of the military while he killed off the civilians. Was this a mercy of Tobi's? Did he plan to take the hard part himself? Or perhaps this was some cruel intent to drive Itachi into accepting the curse of hatred by forcing him to murder women and children, his friends and his own family. Perhaps it was both, ensuring Itachi would remain alive long enough to hate Konoha for what it had made him do. Of course, it was a surprise to be sure when he learned Itachi had chosen love instead of hate, even when he had to kill Izumi, his childhood crush. Sneaking into her home, he found her there, cast her under Tsukiyomi, where he would carefully craft for his beloved a world where she would live happily forever with him, a world where they would marry, where she would bear his children, where she could peacefully pass in his arms at the ripe age of 80. It was an easy world for Itachi to create after all. It was the one he had dreamed about himself for a long time now. And when she reached the point in her dream where she was dying in his arms of old age, he proceeded to kill her, with her merely awakening for a moment to thank her beloved for a life well spent. But I really hate this moment. I mean, it's so good in story, and it's a perfect moment to really round out and expose his character. But I just feel so badly about this tragic life he lives where he can't ever have anything without it being taken away from him. His clan, his village, his innocence, his love, his health, everything keeps getting taken away from him. So for this one moment, I'm going to change this. I'm going to give him something. I'm going to give him Izumi and see how this maybe changes his life. So join me, will you? Let's stop this tragedy in the name of love and bring a little bit of sunshine back to the Weeping Crow. Our story starts that faithful night. Just outside the compound, Toby and Itachi meet up. This is it. The end of a weight that has been chained to my neck for far too long, the masked man said in the voice of Madara. Itachi was unsure how this man could be Madara. He had his suspicions that he wasn't truly the legendary Shinobi, as his age would have come and gone a long time ago. But still, Itachi knew that there were many who had gained strange abilities and jutsu to extend their life beyond natural years. Orochimaru was one of them. If Orochimaru, the man who paled in comparison to Lord Second, could discover a way to live forever through leeching off of someone else, then how much more could a man who proved every bit Lord Second's superior do the same? The masked man stepped up to his side, just in Itachi's peripheral vision. Can you do it? Itachi looked over at the man. No expression could be seen from that mask, but the raising of hands showed hesitation and a misunderstood question. What I mean is, can you kill them all without remorse? I don't want your conscience getting the better of you and you leaving me high and dry. Itachi's eyes narrowed. I could worry about myself. You do the same. The man under the moniker of Madara crossed his eyes. Remember the plan. You take to the streets and slaughter them all. Every man, woman, and child. If it has eyes, kill it. I will pay visit to the police force. Itachi nodded. In that moment, his body turned to crows and he flew off. Toby was left standing there. Seeing the crows fly off, he scoffed within himself. He's not going to do it. In that moment, his eye began to let out a swirling pattern, not too unlike the drain of a bathtub as it swallowed up used water. He was pulled into his own dimension, and from there he appeared in front of the police force's headquarters. At his side was a single katana, the same he had used in times past to kill the daimyo. Ironically, that had been the time that he first met Itachi. Itachi was one of the few to survive, and that was because he was smart. But that day troubled him, because not only was Itachi smart, he was soft. Toby mused that he had been the same in times past, and that it was the reason why this mission would be good for Itachi. Itachi was strong, so much so that Konoha's rules had been bent just to allow him to join the Anbu at an early age. This mission, staining his hands with the blood of those he loved only to be rejected by the village that had used him, it was almost too perfect. It surely would show Itachi the inescapable truth of the world and lead to his development of hatred, which would lead him closer to the Eye of the Moon plan. Itachi's eye was special. It was almost a sign from God that Itachi belonged under Madara, as Itachi's innate ability within his Mangekyo was a limited version of the ability that Toby required through the Ten Tails to make his dream into a reality. As he stood there, the two guards up front witnessed him and called out to him, demanding to know his identity and intentions. Oh, I'll show you my intentions. He stepped forward boldly. In a flash, with a flicker of his body, that slowly stepping masked man was now standing behind the guards, his katana in a reverse grip, dripping with crimson blood, the first casualties of his slaughter. The men looked back, stunned by his speed. It was then that the deep cuts he had carved burst with blood and piercing cries of fear and agony as the men fell to their sides, the ghost leaving them before their knees ever touched the soil. Toby would switch his grip to the more common forward-facing blade. He would swing it to the side, slinging off much of the blood with centrifugal force before dragging the blunt of the blade across the inside of his bent elbow to further clean it before returning it to its saya still hanging at his belt. Reaching behind him, the clanging of metal could be heard as a chain dropped, his Mangekyo Sharingan glowing in the shadows of the dark. Passing through doors without even opening them, he left what happened next up to the imagination of the viewer. Elsewhere, Itachi had made it to the compound proper. The moon was rising. He stood perched on a utility pole like a crow. For years, the crow had been seen as an omen of death, its omen surpassed only by the vulture. Perhaps tonight Itachi was not a crow. Perhaps he was the vulture, a scavenging bird that killed the small and picked clean the carcass of what had already died. And tonight, everyone in the village was dead. They just didn't know it yet. Moving swiftly and quietly, like the angel of death, he passed through the village. The first place he would go was Izumi's home. She was the one he loved the most, and she was the one that he needed to kill first. She was his weakness. His mind was already working overtime, his heart bleeding from the actions yet to be taken. A strange manipulation of cause and effect, in which the effect was felt before the action was made. He knew if he didn't kill her first, he would not have the emotional fortitude to do so later. So he made it into her house quickly. Coming to her room, she noticed him, his eyes glowing in the dark. "Itachi, what are you doing here?" He didn't answer her, merely looking on from the darkness. For a moment, she thought she witnessed dark intent and hatred within those eyes, but upon closer examination, his eyes were displaying fear, like a child that had done something wrong and was waiting to confess to their mother. Tears welled up in those war-waging eyes. "Itachi, what's wrong?" A tear of blood dripped from his mangekyo. "Izumi, I'm caught." She pulled him into her room, into the moonlight, to get a closer look at his face. "Caught? How so?" She immediately noticed his flak jacket and the blood-stained blade in his hand. "Itachi?" His cheeks pulled into a sorrowful expression. "There's no other choice. I had no other choice." Was he trying to convince her, or was he trying to convince himself? "Itachi, what's happening?" Itachi opened his eyes once more, his sclera reddened by tears and strain from the quickly bursting blood vessels within his straining mangekyo. "We couldn't stop the coup, and time ran out. I'm putting the coup down for good, by orders of His Excellence." Her heart stopped for a second as her mind struggled to process this. Feeling the moment begin to return, she took a breath and continued. "Is there no other choice?" He nodded. "If I kill everyone, my brother will survive. If I don't, we all die together. I have to save what I can. I need to save him." She grabbed Itachi's cheeks and pulled him into her kiss. "Then save him," she said. Itachi heard that. For a second, he enjoyed the last kiss he would ever taste from his love. Gripping her throat, he pushed her back and raised his blade, his face displaying rage, the only emotion he could conjure that would give him the strength to do this. But as he did so, her smile caught him. "What an honor, to die in the arms of the one person who means the most to me. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." She shattered his will with that simple phrase. In an effort to salvage this, he cast her under genjutsu. He couldn't have her running around. Couldn't have her see it, hear it. He picked her up and gently laid her in bed, as if this were any other night. Covering her up, he turned back. Exiting the room, he made his way down, trying to regain his nerve. He stabbed himself in the leg with his blade, a superficial wound, nothing that would stop his movements, nothing that would threaten his life, enough to flood his mind with pain and anger, drowning out his weakness. And with increased vigor and fury, he began to slice through them. The best he could do to maintain his sanity was to not see them as human. These were animals. He was a predator on the hunt. These were merely prey in the big game called the natural order. For him and his brother to live, they had to die. So that's what he did. The only time this illusion was shaken was when the children cried out for their mothers as the blade struck wrong. He tried to make it quick and painless, but on the rare occasions his emotions affected his accuracy, another piece of him died inside. Just another chip of his soul was carved out, becoming one step closer to being inhuman. It was then that he was sure that he had lost his soul. He had become a demon. And so this demon passed through the clan's compound like a cold wind carrying the scent of blood, death. Stopping at his parents' home, he entered the dark abode. Stepping up to the highest floor where his parents were likely in bed asleep, he opened the door to see them kneeling in the center of the room in front of him. He was confused but for a moment until he realized that they knew what was going on. They didn't bother to ask him why or how, they just awaited their demise. And so Itachi brought it, only their words of encouragement, his father's declaration of pride in Itachi being enough to shake him. But by then their fates were sealed. Suddenly a presence was felt. He heard a gentle gasp. He turned around. There he saw Sasuke, standing, confusion on his face, tears boiling up in his large innocent eyes, sweat on his brow. He had seen this face on every child he'd slaughtered that night. What was one more? Suddenly, as he stepped forward, his sanity snapped back. "Stop it. Please, no. Anything but my brother," he cried out. The crow stood there and watched through his own eyes the look on his brother's face, as the man he used to be begged himself to remember why he chose to do this. In a moment of shame from nearly forgetting what he had done this for, Itachi almost cried, but he didn't. He held it together. He would put on a show. Hatred, he thought to himself. I deserve to be hated. I don't deserve Sasuke. I need to die. I want to die. Let him be the one who executes you, Crow. He shall bear the blade that ends your life. Go down in history as a murderer. Fade into hell and shame as the village celebrates the one who extinguished you. Make him hate you and make your brother the hero the world wants. Itachi gripped his brother and subjected him to the Tsukiyomi. Watch it. Every personality that had split off from the strain of this night shouted at once. Every personality but the true Itachi, who cried out from the darkest depths of his soul for Sasuke to forgive him. Dropping Sasuke, he walked away. Sasuke then developed his Sharingan and raced towards him, intending to kill him. Having thrown Sasuke to the side, Sasuke opened his eyes for a moment to witness Itachi there, and in that moment he saw tears. Not the bloodlust of the crow, but the tears of his brother, who at this moment wished to die. Itachi, in control of himself once more, walked on, leaving the compound. It was later that night, towards the turn of the morning, that the Anbu made their discovery. Lord Third had declared to them that they would go in and seize the Uchiha conspirators and end the coup peacefully, but it was already over, and Danzo had done it. Danzo had seen it and inside himself smiled with a sigh of relief. The Uchiha have gotten their just desserts. But who will give you yours? Was this himself talking, or was it someone else? No, it was an interpretation. An interpretation from the view he saw in an eye from an Anbu mask standing before him. It was discovered that there were two survivors, Izumi and Sasuke. Danzo's eye narrowed further as the bandage over his right eye wrinkled. Don't touch them. She's a part of the deal now. Harm them and you will regret it. Suddenly, the Anbu member disappeared into a murder of crows. Danzo growled, Itachi. Hiruzen would then place Danzo under house arrest for his part in this, disbanding Root officially. Later that day, Itachi would approach Hiruzen. There, he would report two simple words. Mission complete. Hiruzen was disturbed by this. An unsanctioned mission by Danzo had resulted in this slaughter. If this reached the public, the pure brutality would be enough to destroy the village's reputation. Itachi was the fall guy, the scapegoat. That was Danzo's goal all along. Hiruzen wondered if he shouldn't just acknowledge this to the rest of the village, expose it all for better or worse. However, he found himself asking what Itachi would do next. Itachi would mention that there was a group that he planned to join to keep an eye on. He would make sure that they didn't make any real problem for Konoha. Hiruzen in return would promise to look over the survivors of the massacre, Itachi's treasured brother and love. Itachi would express his gratitude and begin to leave. Before leaving the village though, he stopped by Izumi's hospital room. She was about to be released due to not having been harmed in any meaningful way. However, she stopped when she saw Itachi sitting in the windowsill. She turned around and walked to him. He looked tired. His eyes were half open, had dark circles around them, and he was as pale as a ghost. He looked as if he had aged 10 years since she saw him the night before. She walked to him. Itachi? He looked over. I'm sorry. She shook her head. Itachi, don't apologize for something you were forced to do. You followed orders. The guilt lies with the people who ordered it. He looked at her as if to challenge that statement, but remained silent. Instead, he spoke. Take care of Sasuke. She looked to him. Why don't you take care of him? He looked to her. I'm leaving for another mission. She was stunned. Another mission? Now? Can't you rest first? He was silent for a moment. Then he laid his head back against the sill and looked out over the village. I will never sleep again. She could do nothing else but look on with worry, knowing that somehow this guilt, this stress, this inability to sleep would catch up with him. Please, Itachi, think about your health. If you don't rest, you'll get sick. Itachi didn't look at her. Maybe I deserve to get sick. I pray that God punishes me for what I've done. She nearly slapped him. Don't say such a thing. He looked over. His gaze really showed an inability to care. She was almost in tears. I want to stay with you, she said. Itachi shook his head. I need to go. You need to stay. Watch over Sasuke. These are our rules now. She was silent. What if they come for us? We're the only survivors. Itachi shook his head. They won't. I'll be watching over you. She looked on, tears in her eyes. How? Itachi held out his hand as a crow bearing a Sharingan landed on his forearm. This is Wotan. He's a very special crow to me. He acts as my eyes when I can't be around. He'll watch over you and Itachi, and if you ever need me, know I won't be far. The crow then flew off. Anytime you hear the call of the crow, know that I'm there. He looked down for a moment, and then back up. In that moment, he felt like he was back in the academy. The same schoolboy who was too shy to tell her how he felt, despite knowing she reciprocated. He offered a weak smile. I love you, Izumi. She pulled him into a kiss. I love you, Itachi. Letting him go, he fell out the window. She stuck her head out just long enough to see his body dissipate into crows as they flew off in every direction. She didn't have the strength to smile, nor the strength to cry. She merely watched. In the distance, she noticed the Sharingan-bearing crow, Wotan, eyeing her, letting out a caw as it sat on the power lines. Its wings flared as it too fell from the line into flight. She would leave the room. Passing down into the children's ward, she stopped by Sasuke's room. He had not awakened since that night. Despite there being no real life-threatening wounds on him, he had yet to wake up. Doctors couldn't explain it, but Izumi could. Sasuke didn't want to wake up. He didn't want to live in a world where he had nobody. She would open the door gently and step into the room. Coming to his bedside, she put her hand on his and gently stroked it as she kissed his cheek. I'm here, Sasuke. You'll never be alone. She herself was young, only a few years older than Sasuke, but her promise was held and she fought for custody of the boy. Hiruzen decided it was best to let the two share an apartment. It was better than letting Sasuke live by himself, and from then on, she began to watch over him like an older sister. She would watch over him as she did chores, washed a few dishes from their lunch. She recalled that the first time she met Sasuke, Itachi let her hold him, but it wasn't a happy time that would last very long as she was quickly pushed away by the infant who wished to return to his brother's arms. In a way, she sensed that perhaps Sasuke still felt that way, but was unable to do anything. For a time, she would find him wandering the Uchiha compound. She always knew where to find him, as he had a tendency to go back to the same place time and time again, his family's old home. The first day that he didn't come back from the academy, she panicked, but Wotan would land nearby and call out with its caw. Witnessing it, it would fly off in a certain direction and she would follow. Leading her to the Uchiha compound, she would find Sasuke in his old room, just curled up in the corner in the dark, only his single Tomoe Sharingan glowing in the night. He was confused, scared, unsure where he fit into the world, but still trying to understand his feelings. By Itachi's request, she didn't speak much about him, nor did she ever explain to Sasuke why Itachi did what he did, and slowly she saw him slipping into darkness. She saw his love for Itachi transform into a deep, burning hatred as a defense mechanism. That was the secret to an Uchiha. Everyone saw the Uchiha as these monsters on the battlefield, naturally gifted and cold. Not so. Well, I mean, it was so, but they were far from cold. They weren't inhuman killers who fed off of strife like the history books would portray. No, quite the opposite. The Uchiha were more human than anyone else. The Uchiha's hearts were always large and wide open. They loved so much. Their hearts were full of love to the point that when something earned their admiration, they'd be willing to give up everything, including their lives, to protect that thing. But when that thing was taken from them, when they lost their love, they'd be willing to kill to have it back, to slaughter if they couldn't have it back. As strongly as they loved, they hated with all the same strength. And this hate was not based in evil. This hate was the result of a shattered heart. Someone in so much pain that is spilled out in an ugly way. And right now, Sasuke was going through that. The curse of hatred seeds had been planted in his heart, and now, with enough time to let the pain sink in, that seed had budded into the beginnings of hatred. The older he grew, the more pronounced it became, until the only things on his mind were either procreation or murder. His only goals in life were to kill the man who destroyed his clan and then remake his clan from the ground up. So many times she asked him, "What's your dream after that? Should you ever complete that mission, what comes next?" And his answers were nothing. Nothing came next, she assumed. His only goal in life was a goal based out of spite. She wondered if he could ever have any meaningful relationship with anyone. She began to think that maybe if he did, maybe if he found that meaningful relationship, he might drop that hatred and return to love. He might reject the Uchiha curse, but it seemed impossible. In the academy, Sasuke was the most popular boy in the entire class, and yet for all of his admirers and suitors, he rejected them, each and every one of them. Any advance was met with insult and indignation. To a point, he reminded her of Itachi, but not in a good way. He took it to extremes. Itachi was just shy and reserved. Sasuke was hateful and cruel. He didn't actively seek trouble, but when it came around, he made anyone who brought it regret ever approaching him. There was one boy in class that Sasuke seemed to hate the most. A young boy of the now defunct Uzumaki clan. That boy tested Sasuke the most, and to a point, Izumi wondered if this Naruto kid could be someone who could actually make it as Sasuke's friend. He wasn't afraid to tell Sasuke what he thought. Sasuke's nature did not intimidate him, and on the many occasions to which they fought, despite Sasuke being superior, Naruto could hold his own. She wondered if he could do it. If Naruto could be Sasuke's first friend. She hoped so. Sasuke needed someone in his life, and considering how the village treated this boy, considering his history and loss of parents, it was obvious that Naruto could sympathize. Still, despite everything, Sasuke ignored him. Sasuke rarely did anything outside of school. If he wasn't in school, he was at home. And if he wasn't at home, then he was at the compound. And if he wasn't at the compound sulking, then he was in the forest training. All these things he did alone. Even when he was home, he was alone. She would sit across from him at dinner and ask him about his day. His only response was a quick "fine" that he punched out there in an almost insulting way, as if his answer bore a hidden question within it, as if asking, "What should you care? Or why should I have to tell you?" It was growing unhealthy. She would try to talk about it with him, but he was uninterested in talking, and if she pushed the matter, it would only end in a shouting match. Him calling her annoying and her calling him a little ass and a twerp. It had never gotten physical to their credit, but if they had said to others what they said to each other, or if anyone else had said those things, there would have been blood. There were times that she grew tired of it and considered just telling Sasuke about Itachi, but a quick glimpse of Wotan's disapproving stare told her all she needed to know to keep quiet. She would not tell Sasuke, and in return, Sasuke would never change. Still, despite all of this, Izumi wasn't Sasuke's mother. She was merely there for moral support. She was still a shinobi, and her own future was still what came first. Some time had passed, and she already became a chunin. She had duties to fulfill, and while the Hokage wouldn't send her out of the village without notice, he would keep her busy in the village. She patrolled the area, watched the walls, kept the gate, and offered general assistance to anyone in the village who might need it. But on one day in particular, she had been called in by the Hokage for an urgent mission. Responding, she made it to the Hokage's residence just as the sun was getting low in the sky. She left Sasuke something in the fridge to eat and made her way out. She recalled passing him on the way out. She jumped from rooftop to rooftop, but there was no mistaking it. He, like many of his former clansmen, wore a dark shirt at all times with an Uchiha fan on the back, the namesake of their clan. He didn't notice her, but she did, as did Wotan, who broke off from her mid-flight and circled Sasuke, as if letting her know that he was watching over Sasuke. Certain her charge was safe, she made her way to the Hokage's residence, and they found Hiruzen pacing the floors. She arrived already on her knee before her afterimage caught up with her. Hiruzen would turn around to see her, and many other shinobi caught up. She looked up to the Hokage as he began to speak. "Something I long feared has come to pass. Naruto has taken the scroll." Izumi, waiting for her turn to speak, and the okay from the Hokage, asked what it meant. Hiruzen would explain that Naruto was the current vessel of the nine-tailed fox that had sacked the village about 12 years earlier. This revelation was new to her. She recalled the Nine-Tails attack. She witnessed the death of her father over and over again in her mind, feeling the trauma creeping back up her as the Hokage spoke. This Naruto boy was the Nine-Tails? How could that be? The Hokage answered her question she had yet to even ask. There were no other choices at the time when the Nine-Tails attacked. To save the village, the Nine-Tails was sealed into an infant who now bears the full weight of that burden. Izumi was shocked, to say the least. She felt a burning hatred in her heart, knowing that the Nine-Tails had slaughtered so many, including her papa, a death she carried with her still, blamed herself over still. For a moment, her inner self asked why she should care what happens to Naruto, but quickly she caught herself when she remembered that Hiruzen had mentioned that it had been sealed into the infant to save the village. She realized Naruto was not a villain for harboring the Nine-Tails, he was a hero for imprisoning it. Having quickly sorted out how she should feel about this, she asked for more details on the mission. She asked what scroll he had stolen and what was so important about it. Hiruzen told her and the other assembled shinobi that Naruto had stolen the Scroll of Seals. There was almost an audible gasp, though she didn't recognize the name. Hiruzen explained for the non-gaspers that this scroll was one of the most important artifacts left to them by Hashirama Senju, and that every Hokage save Minato Namikaze, whose term as Hokage was too short, had contributed to it in some fashion, but none had contributed to it as much as Tobirama Senju. He explained that the Scroll of Seals was a scroll that contained every kinjutsu, that is to say, forbidden techniques, that had ever been discovered by Konoha. There were many types of kinjutsu recorded there, ranging from jutsu that were just too dangerous to perform, such as the 8th Gate of Death, Multi-Shadow Clone Jutsu, and the Reaper Death Seal, to more inhumane ones, such as the Impure World Reincarnation technique. He said that the scroll was barely dangerous to Naruto, who himself did not possess the aptitude to utilize any of the jutsu within, but that he may become a target to those who would take the scroll for themselves, or sell the contents to other nations, thereby crippling many of the secret techniques of the village. He said that it was paramount to retrieve the scroll, and to that end he sent them out after it. It was Izumi who would take the lead, as she possessed the Sharingan which she could utilize for tracking. She could see anything with it, so she began to lead the charge into finding him. As she did so, she stumbled across Irika Umino, who had taken a Fuma Shuriken to the back. He was in critical condition. She checked him over with her Sharingan. The Shuriken had missed his spine and had just barely missed his lung, so he would be fine. But they needed to get him to the hospital fast as he was losing blood. One of her peers cursed Naruto, believing that he had hurt Irika, but Izumi stopped him and told him that the size of the weapon, in conjunction with the accuracy, was a bit too much to expect of a student who could not even pass the exams. Furthermore, the shuriken was in Irika's back, not his chest. If Irika confronted Naruto and Naruto had thrown the shuriken, it would have been somewhere in the front of his torso, not his back. This signified that there was someone else around, someone who was after Naruto too. Looking around with her Sharingan, she noticed that there was a depression in the grass about the size of a men's 10.5 shoe. She looked back. We have an enemy combatant in the area. Search for and seize both the scroll and Naruto. If you run into the enemy, lethal force is authorized to apprehend him. The other ninja asked how she knew it was a man, and she noted the size and shape of the boot print, as well as the depression it left behind. It indicated a man about 5'10" with a weight of likely 140 to 150 pounds. Considering she saw things that they did not, they set out with their commands. She also looked around and witnessed smaller shoe imprints running from the scene. She decided to follow those. Looking up, she saw some more wear and stress on the tree limbs and knew that Shinobi must have gone that way. She followed after them herself. As they went, they saw a scene that astounded them. A single boy with what appeared to be close to 1,000 shadow clones standing around the brutalized body of a single man. He learned multi-shadow clone, one of her peers said. She wasn't impressed by that though. Multi-shadow clone wasn't a kinjutsu because nobody could understand how to use it. It was a relatively simple jutsu of the same line as clone transformation. She was more impressed that it could be used on such a scale, but as they disappeared, she grew worried that Naruto had overused it. She jumped down along with her peers who took Mizuki into custody. She stepped in front of Naruto and looked him over, much to his surprise. He didn't look hurt, not too badly. Just a few minor scratches and bruises. His chakra levels were amazingly nowhere near empty. She seemed a little relieved. Was it because he was the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki? Or was it because he was merely the same age as Sasuke and her time spent raising the boy had made her develop motherly feelings? Either way, she reported in that she and her team had apprehended both Naruto and the enemy combatant and had seized the scroll. They returned to the Hokage's residence where she would be debriefed on everything she saw. After that, she was assured that the Hokage would deal with Naruto personally and allowed to return home. The next day, she's laying in bed. The sun was up, the sky was blue, the birds were chirping. Today was a wonderful day, and Izumi had decided to spend it inside sleeping. Outside of her room, Sasuke was cooking something to eat, something only for himself, as it seemed she wasn't planning on adulting today. Lazy, he mumbled under his breath as he flipped the egg over, forming a perfectly cooked omelet. Pouring some orange juice into a cup, he sat down for breakfast and began to eat. Today was a big day. He would finally be placed on a Shinobi team. Was he excited about this? Well, about as excited as Sasuke can be. Today was the first step, a milestone in his journey to murdering Itachi. All he had to do was join his team, gain experience, and allow his abilities and powers to develop under the watchful eye of a master, whose job it was to ensure he properly grew as a shinobi. As he finished the omelet and downed the last portion of juice, he stood and made his way out of the house. Izumi would eventually get out of the bed at about 30 minutes to noon. She would get something light, a piece of toast, and head out. She had no duties today, but she also had nothing to do, so she would wander the village listening to people talk. Meeting with her peers, she heard them mention that he had been allowed to become a genin. The shinobi spoke with contempt, as if letting him do so was a disservice to the village. And he did it using one of the forbidden jutsu he learned after stealing the scroll of seals, the shinobi said. The peer with which he was talking would reply, I don't see why Lord Third didn't just execute him on the spot. If it were me, I would have just thrown the little demon up and under the prison. He reasons too soft. Izumi listened to their speech. There was a time when she had thought the same, but realizing the truth about it, she couldn't bring herself to hate Naruto. He was merely doing his duty, a duty that was forced on him from the village itself. To a point, she was even glad that he passed. She hoped that he might be placed on Sasuke's team. Maybe that would force Sasuke to open up and accept him as a friend. Maybe then Sasuke would give up this toxic dream of fratricide. She would walk about the village, enjoying her day off before returning home. She would prepare something else to eat. It was nearly dusk and Sasuke hadn't come home yet. It was a busy day for him apparently. Normally, teachers didn't take their students on a mission their first day, but she assumed that perhaps his teacher wanted to help break Sasuke into that life. Eventually though, Sasuke did return home, and upon coming home, she would greet him and go through the same tired rigmarole of asking him how his day was, and his response was the same as usual, fine. But this time it didn't pack a punch to it. It seemed like a genuine response. Maybe he was in a good mood today, or perhaps he was just too tired to have an attitude. The look of his clothes and the pungent smell of sweat, grass, and soil permeating the air told her that it may have been the latter. Knowing she was risking making him upset, she pushed the envelope anyway by inquiring more. Today was your big day, becoming a part of a team. What'd you think about it? It's a start, he said as she sat the plates down on the table. She looked up at him from her lowered head, still splitting the concentration between the conversation and setting the table. Well, don't leave me guessing. Tell me about your team. Sasuke sighed a little as he seemed to be growing tired of the prying. Nonetheless, he obliged. The leader of my team is a man named Kakashi Hatake. Izumi recognized the name. He once worked in the Anbu with Itachi. This she knew because he had been the leader of the team Itachi was on prior to being transferred out, Team Ro. She thought of how ironic it was that Sasuke would be on a team led by the same man who led Itachi's team. Sasuke continued, I have two teammates, Sakura Haruno and Naruto Uzumaki. Izumi almost slapped the table. She was right. She had hoped this would happen, and now it was happening. Maybe Hiruzen wanted this as much as she did. She would nod as she listened. That sounds nice. Isn't Naruto that boy you thought was kinda cool? Sasuke looked at her as if she were an idiot. No, he's a loser. I would have rather been teamed up with anyone else in the village. Izumi smiled. You think that now, she thought to herself, but you'll think about it a little differently in about a month or two. She looked to him and spoke. What about Sakura? Didn't you say she has a crush on you? Sasuke sat there, his elbows on the table and his fingers clasped in front of his face, only his eyes peering over the knuckles. Every girl has a crush on me. She's annoying. Right now, Sasuke was acting as if his team left him much to be desired, but Izumi knew different. She had been around Sasuke long enough to understand how he worked, and despite the fact that he wasn't showing it or acknowledging it, he was excited about his new friends and mentor. That part of Sasuke was one she wished he would openly embrace, embracing the love of his friends. But he had already been burned once by someone he adored, and so him acknowledging these feelings may take some time. Then again, they had all the time in the world. The next day, she awoke to find Sasuke getting up as well. Normally, she was always up before him. Today, he was coming out of his room just as soon as she was. She seemed to understand that this might be him being excited. He was going on his first mission today. However, as the day passed, he returned and seemed less than excited. As it turned out, the missions he had undertaken that day were no more than simple chores around the village. She remembered that time in her life, that time when she was a genin and every mission was about as important as walking the dog or getting a cat out of a tree. They were easygoing missions, meant to teach more than anything. A wax on, wax off type of mission. But he wasn't content. He wanted more, even if he wouldn't say it. But she knew if he stuck with it, then he would get what he deserved. And that day eventually came a few mornings later, when he and the rest of Team 7 were assigned by Hiruzen to escort Tazuna to the Land of Waves. It seemed this was given to them due to a request from Naruto, another on the team who had grown tired of the easy pacing. She had to hand it to him. He knew how to get what he wanted, and he wasn't too shy to try. Sasuke would pack some things into a bag quietly. He would have told her what was going on, but he didn't feel obligated to say anything more than, "I'm going to be out of the village for a few days on a mission." And honestly, that was a proper response. She let him go and continued her daily duties. While Sasuke was gone, she would get called upon by Hiruzen to a meeting. She would appear before the Hokage and await instructions. She, along with many other Chunin and Jonin, were informed that the Chunin exams were in preparations. Honestly, Izumi had forgotten that the exams were so close. Hiruzen would inform them that soon enough, members from other villages would start filling into their village, as Konoha was hosting the exams this time around. What Izumi and the other Konoha nin were to do would be to watch as the foreign shinobi came into the village. It was important to watch them in case they were there to spy or plot, but it was equally important that they should have proper protection. Should an incident occur in the village in which a genin from another village were to be killed outside of the exams under suspicious circumstances, it was possible that this could be taken as a sign of aggression on Konoha's part and lead to a war. At worst, possibly the Fourth Shinobi World War. Izumi shuddered. Having been alive during the time of the Third, she knew the pain it could cause firsthand, as both her brother and mother were in that war. Konoha was gracious enough to schedule their deployments opposite each other. While that meant that her father and mother were apart for the duration of the war, it also meant that one of the two parents could be around to take care of Izumi. Eventually, both of her parents were deployed to fight in the war, leaving little Izumi all alone. Thankfully, there were kind souls in the village who looked out for her, and while she was lonely, she knew her parents were going to be needed to protect the village. She was still worried as any child would be. She prayed for their safety every night, and she read the newspaper every day in hopes that there would be good news in regards to the war's end. She recalled when word reached them that the Konobi Bridge had been destroyed. She didn't know what it meant, but she was informed by an adult nearby that it meant the war would end soon. With the bridge gone, the enemy would have a hard time getting food and supplies, meaning that they'd have to go home. It began to be known that Shinobi would be pulled back from the war, and the prospect of that excited Izumi. Every day she would wait in front of the gates. She remembered getting a sunburn because she waited so long. Shinobi would come through the gates and pass her by without word of her parents. Her worry began to set in, but 3 days after the first Shinobi came home, she saw them. A man and woman passing through the crowd with smiles on their faces. Tears of joy coming to her eyes, she ran to them. That night, they told her of how they were outnumbered and surrounded, but how the yellow flash of the leaf appeared and single-handedly killed every Iwan nin in the area with his flying Raijin technique. That night was a good night, but she knew how easily she could have been left waiting at that gate for eternity, waiting for people who would never return to come home. And that was why she knew how important the mission Hiruzen had given her was. She and her peers were the one thing standing between all the children of the leaf and losing their parents. So she began to go about her work with incredible conviction. Looking up, she did not see Wotan everywhere. The crow was still watching over Sasuke, and that was a good thing. She watched the different villages shinobi come in. There were shinobi from Sunagakure, chief of which were Gaara, Kankuro, and Temari, the children of the 4th Kazekage himself. For that reason, a greater than average security detail was granted to them, and the Hokage even offered private residence to them away from the other prospective Chunin that were there. Besides Suna, there was also Amagakure, the village hidden in the rain. It was a village where rain was a constant, and their people were led by the legendary shinobi Hanzo Hanzo of the Salamander. They were a reclusive village, but their shinobi were always top tier, especially in the recent years for reasons that could not be explained. Then there was Otogakure. This village was a relatively new one. It was unknown who their leader was, and most everything about Oto was unknown save for their shinobi were unusually brutal, something that caused Hiruzen to demand extra security on the teams over. Izumi was personally requisitioned to watch over the Kazekage's children. In doing so, she realized that they were brutal. They had no qualms in attacking others or even each other, with Gaara keeping his siblings in check under threat of death, something they truly feared, meaning it wasn't just a metaphor. She would watch them for most of the day until the shift change in which she was allowed to go home. It was then that Sasuke stumbled home. He was tired and beat up, his arms covered in cuts and bruises and even small pin dot marks. She asked him what happened. He mentioned that he had been on a mission to the Land of Waves, and that during this time he had been attacked, along with the rest of his team, by a group of rogue shinobi from Kirigakure. He would say that he had almost died, but managed to survive by the skin of his teeth. She would pull out a first aid kit and administer treatment to him, cleaning each of his wounds and wrapping them in bandages so they could heal. During this time, Sasuke spoke of how Kakashi possessed a Sharingan. Izumi mentioned that she had known of this due to knowing Kakashi and his reputation in the past. She thought Sasuke might be excited to have a teacher who had similar abilities to him, but she was mistaken. Sasuke spoke of it with contempt, believing it to be deplorable that he would bear the eye of his people without having been born of it. Izumi elected to stay out of this. Sasuke, however, would drop the subject, as Kakashi had used it properly to protect his team and defeat the enemy. He further mentioned that he wasn't sure how they survive. He remembered being caught by the demonic mirroring ice crystals technique and taking a shot meant for Naruto and almost dying. The next thing he remembered, he was awake on the bridge and the battle was over. Izumi would ask Sasuke about taking a shot for Naruto, but Sasuke waved it off. When she pressed him about it, he would tell her that his body just moved. It wasn't a planned action. Izumi would smile. Sasuke refused to admit it and would not say as much out loud, but he was beginning to actually care for his team. He was making friends, and that was something she was pleased with. The next day, as she was watching over the people coming into the village, she was informed that Sasuke would be able to take the exams along with his team, which pleased her immensely. As the Chunin exams came around, her role began to change. She was requisitioned to help create the scrolls, with which the genin would attempt to pilfer to the center structure during the Forest of Death. The scroll was simple. It was merely two jutsu types. One was a sleeping genjutsu, the other was a summoning jutsu. Both were required to have a location in which they would work. For the sleeping jutsu, the area of effect was anywhere outside of the Colosseum, and as for the summoning jutsu, that was inside the stadium. Two scrolls would be required to move on, and that was the Heaven and Earth scrolls. Both were a different color, but the contents were the same. As the first exam came to a close and the second was beginning, she gets called back by one of her senior jonin. Whatever it was an emergency. She rushed to her superior's side, where she was informed along with her peers that one of the shinobi groups from outside of Konoha had been murdered. They examined the bodies. They were Kusanin, the team known as Team Shiore. She thought this was highly suspect, as she had just seen them enter the Forest of Death. But what was even stranger was that they were all missing faces. Considering the temperature of the bodies, she realized they'd been dead far longer than the Forest of Death test had been taking place. She would realize that whoever she saw enter the Forest of Death could not have been the real Team Shiore, and could only be imposters. Because of this, a team was sent into the forest to apprehend Team Shiore. They needed to bring the killer to justice, otherwise it would mean war. As she went in, she was paired with Anko. They would encounter Orochimaru, the one who had killed the Kusanin. Together, Anko and Izumi would fight, with Orochimaru showing great interest in Izumi's eyes. For a time, he considered also placing a curse mark on her, but when it failed due to Anko's interference, Orochimaru decided to cut his losses. After all, he had already marked another shinobi possessing the Sharingan earlier. Why would he need another? With one swift strike, one of Orochimaru's snakes bit Izumi. She landed on the tree branches and held her wound. She tried to help Anko, but instead she passed out and fell from the tree. Izumi was out for a while, but eventually she was awakened in the hospital. She'd been treated for poison. Normally they could not help her with the level of poison that was administered, but with Anko and Hiruzen's help, due to both knowing who Orochimaru was, she was capable of recovering when an anti-venom was created. The Forest of Death exam was over by the time she woke up and was able to leave the hospital, but the preliminary exhibitions were about to begin. She had been informed that Sasuke was also attacked by Orochimaru, and so she went to check up on him and see if he was okay. He mostly was, but his ninjutsu was heavily hampered due to a curse mark placed on him, a mark Anko also shared, a mark known as the Curse Mark of Heaven. She urged Sasuke to drop out of the exams, but he refused, stating that this was his chance to get stronger faster. He managed to win the first round utilizing nothing but taijutsu. This astounded her. His opponent was far from unreliable, and Sasuke still managed to beat him without ninjutsu. After this though, Sasuke would allow Kakashi to put an evil sealing jutsu over top of his curse mark to keep it from spreading, though the process was painful and left him unconscious for a while. Sasuke was out for quite some time, and she kept him in her care for the duration of this time. Wasn't like it mattered much. The Chunin exams were slated to take a month-long pause after the end of the preliminaries, and Sasuke would have that time to rest and train. His rounds were already over for the month. Eventually, the exams preliminaries came to a close, and Sasuke had fully recovered. Once more, he was packing his bags though. She asked him what he was doing, and he responded that he was going off to train with Kakashi for a month. Izumi would wish him luck and tell him to be careful. Sasuke would leave the home without replying to her further. Izumi had things to do this month as well. Orochimaru was confirmed to be in the village, and she needed to help the village's forces find him before he could cause any more trouble. She would join the others in search of him. He was an expert in espionage, as most shinobi were, but Orochimaru was something truly special, a real snake in the grass. It was suspected that Orochimaru had come for Sasuke, but if that were true, he would have taken him, right? He didn't take him. He branded him and left. So what was the mission besides that? By this time, it had been discovered that Otogakure was siding with Orochimaru, but at this point, there weren't any shinobi from there left in the exams. Zaku had his arms brutally mutilated in the exams in his battle against Shino, something that would likely end his career as a shinobi. And his accomplice, Kintsuchi, had disappeared from public view. Both were taken somewhere else, and Dosu was found murdered after the end of the preliminaries, suggesting that whatever connection they had to Orochimaru was now in jeopardy due to their failure. However, it was obvious that they had other spies in the village. During her investigation, she spots a suspicious shinobi girl that she can't help but get a bad feeling from. Her suspicions are proven correct when she witnesses a black mark on the back of her neck. She follows her, and when she does so, she would discover where she was based, an old abandoned building in the Uchiha compound. She grunted, knowing that Orochimaru was utilizing the site of her clan's downfall as a place to overthrow Konoha from. She would inform the others, and they would go to where they would find markings on the ground, but no sign of Orochimaru nor the girl. They would examine the markings and learn that it was indeed a sealing formula. But for what? They would report back to Hiruzen with their findings, and he'd begin to show fear. These markings were ones he recognized. He hadn't seen these since the First Shinobi World War. He explained to them that these markings were used for a profane ritual that Tobirama Senju had created during the First Shinobi World War. It was called the Impure World Reincarnation Jutsu, a jutsu meant to form Ito Tensei, undead warriors who were both immortal and completely under the control of Orochimaru. Furthermore, he points out that the two separate circles connected by a sealing formula reference that Orochimaru has just resurrected two warriors as Ito Tensei, but who they are remains a mystery. For a time, the shinobi continue to investigate, but they don't turn up any leads. As the Chunin exams continue, suddenly a smoke bomb goes off in the Hokage's viewing box. Izumi is the first up there, where she finds both the Kazekage and Hokage have disappeared. What's worse, the village is being attacked by snakes, and most everyone in the Colosseum have been put to sleep. She would attempt to help out in any way she could. She would try to help Hiruzen, but the barrier that the Sound Four had erected had left her as nothing but a spectator. She's forced to watch as Orochimaru summons the bodies of the second and third Hokage. He even tries to summon the fourth, but for some reason it fails. Hiruzen would be forced to utilize the Reaper Death Seal to deal with them. He seals away the first and second Hokage, and then attempts to seal away Orochimaru, but when that fails, he resolves to seal away only his arms, which cripples Orochimaru. Orochimaru would then, with the help of the Sound Four, escape the village. Izumi would rush to the Hokage's side, but he was dead, his soul consumed by the Shinigami. The feeling was somber, and Izumi was fearful that this would lead to war. With the Hokage dead, Konoha was left without a leader, and with the discovery of the Kazekage's body, it could very well be a sign that war was coming. Then again, as she thought about it, the Kazekage's death may have been a blessing in disguise, as Suna was also without their leader, which meant they couldn't just attack them now. This bought them some time. They needed a new Hokage. This position was offered to Jiraiya, but he refused it. In turn, they sent him and Naruto out after Tsunade in hopes that maybe she could lead them. They needed a strong and competent leader, someone who could command the world stage, someone more than just a brilliant mind, but someone with a lot of presence. A legend, someone who could be verified as strong. And there were few more qualified than the legendary Kunoichi, the Sannin Tsunade. While Naruto and Jiraiya left, Izumi remained home with Sasuke. He'd been released from the hospital after his battle against Gaara, but he wasn't his usual self. He was mopier. He was bitter because he spent so much time growing stronger, even going so far as to use the second stage Curse Mark of Heaven against Gaara, and couldn't keep up with Naruto, someone who had proven time and time again to be worthless as a shinobi. He was being outdone, and he didn't like that. All of his training was proving to be useless. However, he was invited to meet with Kakashi. That night, however, as she was putting up the dishes after supper, she heard the call of a crow. She looked to the open window to see Wotan sitting on the windowsill looking at her. He wanted her to follow him, and so that's exactly what she did. It led her out of the village and past the gate. She eventually lost sight of the bird. She looked around for it, but couldn't find it. That was until she heard it crow again. Looking up, she noticed the crow perched on the arm of a man in a black coat with red clouds on it. The man gently stroked the crow with his finger as the bird lovingly rubbed its head against him. He looked down at her, his crimson eyes glowing in the darkness. To anyone else, they might believe it to be a monster, but not Izumi. She knew better. Itachi. He looked down to her and smiled. Izumi. She smiled. She almost wanted to cry. He jumped down from the tree, landing in front of her. How was Sasuke? She looked off into the distance as she put her hands in her pockets. He's a little bit bitter right now. One of his friends has proven to be superior than him with less training, and he's angry. Itachi nodded. That's just how rivalries work. You never want to be on the losing end of one, but it doesn't mean it never happens. You've just got to accept that and work even harder. That's what I told him, Izumi said. It just hasn't seemed to take yet. Itachi nodded. He looked down. I came back to tell you to warn the village. A partner and I have been requisitioned to take the Nine Tails. Izumi cocked her head. Why? Itachi shrugged. Not entirely sure. We're currently looking for all-tailed beasts. She nodded. Itachi was silent. That's not entirely it. She looked to him inquisitively. Itachi avoided eye contact. I just wanted to see you again. It's been years, and I knew I would be in Konoha. I thought it would be a good time to visit. I can't stay long though. Kisame will only be preoccupied for a short time longer, and he already doubts my convictions. Izumi nods. I won't lie. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. Sasuke reminds me of you in subtle ways. His mannerisms, his fighting style, his way of carrying himself, it's so similar. I sometimes have to double take thinking he is you, but his personality is just so different. Itachi would look down once more. That's my fault. I put him into this position and manipulated him into accepting the curse of hatred the Uchiha have carried with them for over 1,000 years. Izumi walked over to him. Don't blame yourself. There are things we just can't control. Itachi shook his head. There are also things we can control, and I forced Sasuke to hate me. He's miserable because of me. She would lean forward, her face illuminated by the moonlight as her lips touched his. I love you, Itachi Uchiha. Itachi neither fought it nor reciprocated. He just sat there with a straight face, not engaging in anything. He did not feel worthy enough to. She pulled away. I'll continue to watch over him. Itachi would smile and thank her before disappearing into a flock of crows, Wotan remaining with her. The day after, Itachi and Kisame would enter Konoha, where they'd be located by Kakashi and Might Guy. Guy would drive them off, but Kakashi would fall into the genjutsu Itachi had placed upon him. Sasuke would also eventually learn of this and would race off after Naruto and Jiraiya to stop Itachi, only to have his wrist broken and his mind influenced by Tsukiyomi. He'd be returned to the hospital where Izumi would rush in just to be with him. Seeing the condition he was in, as well as the Tsukiyomi genjutsu he was cast under, she knew that Itachi was still attempting to make Sasuke hate him. She loved Itachi, but she disagreed with this. She knew what Itachi was doing. He was trying to make Sasuke hate him so he could become the hero of this story by killing him, but she didn't like that one bit. She was then considering telling Sasuke the truth. She couldn't let this continue. If she told Sasuke what was really happening, maybe she could alter his way of thinking. She never got the chance to though, because one night, just after being healed by Tsunade, the new 5th Hokage, Sasuke left the village to join Orochimaru. Itachi's plan had backfired. His hatred of Itachi had overpowered the love of his friends, the side of Sasuke that Izumi was trying to foster. For all the love she felt in her heart for Itachi, she knew he was in the wrong for what he had done. A team was sent after Sasuke to bring him back to the village, whether he wanted to or not, but in the end, it wasn't enough, and Sasuke joined Orochimaru. Izumi would lay in bed that night, thinking about how empty her home was now. Sasuke was always silent, yes, but this was different. This was a different silence, and one that filled her full of dread. She needed to stop Sasuke before he did something he'd regret. She came home sweaty and tired once again. She was covered in scrapes and bruises. She'd been training hard and often meeting with Itachi to help investigate locations he believed were hideouts for Orochimaru, but it was to no avail. Sasuke was nowhere to be found. She would just lie there on her back, looking at the ceiling. He's going to kill Sasuke. Sasuke is too stupid to recognize that. He believes he'll simply be strong enough to kill Itachi, but he doesn't know that Orochimaru is going to steal his body. Izumi couldn't have been more wrong. Sasuke knew, but he didn't care. Just as Orochimaru planned to kill Sasuke and take over his body, Sasuke was planning to do the same. As she sat there, she continued to rest. It wasn't much longer until she would fall asleep. She would have the same dream every night. She dreamed of a world where the Uchiha clan downfall never happened. She dreamed of a world where she and Itachi had gotten married and she had borne his children. Oh, how she longed for that reality. A reality where only love existed for the two of them. No fighting, no hate, no strife or bounties put on their heads. A world where Fugaku and Makoto got to hold their first grandchild. A world where Sasuke was excited to watch over his niece and nephew. A world where Itachi's job was solely to be a member of the Konoha police force and work closely with his little brother. But alas, it was just a dream. It had been nearly 3 years since Sasuke had left, and Izumi was now in her early 20s. Sasuke himself would have been 16. She could admit that she didn't miss his hateful attitude, but she did miss having him around. As annoying as he was at times, as infuriating, she still saw him like the little brother she'd always wanted, but never had the opportunity to have. Currently, that boy Naruto and the girl that Sasuke had once been on the same team with were doing their own training in preparation for the day that they would meet Sasuke again. They knew as well as anyone else that to drag Sasuke back to Konoha meant a fight. Sasuke was not one to give up on anything he did. And now that he had thrown his past away in an attempt to destroy any escape, he continued moving forward with his goals and desires of murdering his brother. A grotesque and abominable dream of fratricide. But what more could Izumi do than she was already doing right now? She would find her little brother, and she would then tell not only him, but everyone else the truth. Itachi may not want it, but by thunder she would do it. Even if it meant dragging Itachi back to the village by the ear just as she would Sasuke. She was tired of living a lie and constantly seeing that damned bird everywhere she went. Did it give her comfort? Yes, but she would feel a lot better if it were actually Itachi and not some crow. The morning after, she rose with the cry of a rooster and proceeded to take a shower and change into a new set of shinobi gear. The village's police force had been replaced by shinobi who would bear the same duties for a short time before being transferred out, all except Izumi, who never left the village on a mission, not unless it was a private mission that wasn't acknowledged by the village. It seemed that the next mission was right then and there. She saw Wotan standing in front of her in the middle of the road. She looked at it and it eyed her. It began to fly into the air, circulating over her for a while before flying off towards the Naka River. She followed it and found the crow sitting atop the entrance to the shrine. She walked in and saw Itachi standing there, looking at the monument, the tablet that told the story of the Sage of Six Paths, the Rinnegan, and his sons. Itachi, what is it? Itachi looked back. I have another lead that we need to check out. She looked at him. Is it trustworthy? Itachi nodded. This one came in straight from Sasori. Sasori claims that he had recently set up a meeting with Orochimaru at the Tenkaichi Bridge. Apparently Orochimaru has a secret facility somewhere near there. I was thinking we should go out to scout it. See if what he says has any merit to it. She nods. When do we leave? Tonight. Take only what you need with you. I'll meet you just beyond the gate. His body then turned into crows and they made their way out of the shrine. Izumi sighed as she watched him go. Leaving the shrine, she made it back on track for her daily patrol. Once that was done, she would clock out early and head home, and gather everything she needed for her mission. She then left the village that night, sneaking out past the gate and into the forest where she found Itachi awaiting her, his black cloak making him relatively invisible save for the red cloud markings on the front. One arm sat out, using the low zipper on the front as support. It looked lazy, but then again, he seemed tired, dark lines under his eyes. A man who didn't sleep is the air he put off. He turned and led her off without a word. And just as he didn't speak, neither did she. She merely followed. They jumped from tree limb to tree limb, crossing as much distance as they possibly could. They eventually heard the sound of water flowing nearby as they saw the bridge. Landing there, Itachi looked around. There wasn't any sign of enemies. She looked about. It had taken them hours to get here. The sun was already rising. She was tired and out of breath. Itachi seemed no worse for wear though. That wasn't to say he didn't look tired though, it merely meant that he always looked tired. What do we do now? She asked. The best we can. We can scout the area. He sent a flock of crows from his body in all directions. She watched as they flew off, Wotan taking the lead with his Sharingan. We should scout too, he said. It's possible that the crows will miss something. We need to use our Sharingan closer to the ground to search for any clues that the crows pass up. With that, both of them were on their way, each taking a different direction, jumping through the trees. As she saw the flock of crows she was sweeping up after fly by, she couldn't help but notice how distant Itachi seemed now. He never smiled, he barely talked to her anymore, only ever speaking instructions or delegating important information she would need to perform a task. She wondered if he even loved her anymore, or if he had left that behind along with everything else. Her heart shattered to think that he had forgotten her, but at the same time, she was there for a job of her own. She would find Sasuke, slap some sense into him, and then spill the beans to him, the village, and everyone who cared to hear. She was done keeping secrets, especially if they hurt the ones she loved. She continued searching until eventually she found what looked like a bunker. She could hear voices coming up from below. Upon seeing it, she made her way back from it, careful not to trigger any proximity sensors. Once away, she signaled. A bird's cry. This brought Wotan to her. She spoke to the crow. I found it. Tell Itachi. The crow flew off towards its master. Eventually, Itachi would show up on the branch across from her. What did you find? He asked. She motioned for him to follow her. She jumped from limb to limb until she found the location of the bunker once more. She looked back at Itachi. Itachi looked at the bunker through his Sharingan, Wotan flying over the facility, gazing down with its Mangekyo. He then spoke to her without looking at her. Stay here. She was surprised. What? No, you're not going in there alone. Itachi spoke again. Stay here. You'll only slow me down. She heard this and recalled his brutal honesty and felt a twinge of pain, but she steeled her resolve and spoke again. I'm not letting you go in there just so you can confront Sasuke. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of letting you do this. No more. I'm done hiding the truth from Sasuke. What you and he are doing is unhealthy for you both, and I'm done watching him hate you, and you letting him. If you won't say anything, I will. I'm done with this. He turned around to look at her with his Mangekyo. He cast her under Genjutsu. As she fell from the tree, a flock of crows caught her and lowered her to the ground safely and away from the view of anyone who might pass. And there she was left to rest. Itachi then made his way deeper into the facility. When he entered, he stepped through the shadows, only his Sharingan lighting the area up. The place seemed almost deserted, save for Kabuto, Orochimaru, and Sasuke. Kabuto passed him by once without seeing him. That didn't last long until he grabbed Kabuto and pulled him into the darkness. Where is Sasuke? He said. This wasn't even a question he was asking anymore. It was a command for Kabuto to tell him where he was. Kabuto was not intimidated though, instead merely smiling in a nefarious way. Why, with the master of course. Where else could he be? Itachi demanded to know where Orochimaru was, and Kabuto gave him clear directions. Itachi then cast Kabuto under Genjutsu. As he did, Kabuto went down. However, as he fell, something hit the ground and caught Itachi's attention. He picked it up to examine it. It seemed to be a switch of some sort. No, a silent alarm. He broke into a dash to Orochimaru's room where he'd find an open passageway. He'd rush through and come out on the other side near the river. There he would find Sasuke and Orochimaru. Sasuke's eyes flared, shifted into Sharingan, and he pulled the blade of Kusanagi. Itachi had to play this well. He didn't want Sasuke to realize that he was rescuing him. Orochimaru, Itachi said, Sasuke is my quarry, not yours. I won't let you take him for yourself. He's my last chance to receive a worthy fight from my clansmen. Sasuke seemed to buy it. Go on, Orochimaru. I'll take care of Itachi. Orochimaru looked to Sasuke. No, he's still beyond your level. Follow me and we will continue your training. Sasuke disregarded Orochimaru's plea and began to fight. Itachi fought back, trying to make it look as real as possible. He needed to get Sasuke away from Orochimaru, which meant beating him. Even if Sasuke killed Itachi here, it did not mean he would abandon Orochimaru. It just meant that Sasuke's dream of beating Itachi would occur. His search for power may continue if he's rewarded in this way of gathering strength. So Itachi proceeds to beat Sasuke. Not enough to shatter his confidence, but enough to stop him from following Orochimaru. However, in the middle of it, Orochimaru throws a smoke bomb to obscure Itachi's vision. As Itachi activates his Sharingan, the blade of Kusanagi is sent through the smoke to strike him. Itachi just barely dodges it. He uses wind style to blow the smoke away, but when it's gone, he realizes that they are too. He curses himself for his failure. Time passes, and eventually Izumi wakes up. As she does, she hears crickets chirping and sees that it's dark outside. She hears the crunching of grass and pulls her kunai. Whoever's nearby is planning to attack. Popping out from behind a bush, she just sees Itachi sitting in a clearing all by himself. She looks around and realizes how long she's been under Genjutsu. She walks over to him. Itachi? He looks back at her and then forward again. She sits down beside him. Was Sasuke not there? Itachi looked down. Sasuke was there. He left with Orochimaru before I could stop him. Izumi slapped him on his shoulder. See, this is why I told you to take me with you, dimwit. She saw his expression didn't change, and so she decided that maybe it would be best to go easy on him. She'd scoot closer to him. It'll be okay, she said in a hushed tone. We'll find Sasuke, no matter what. As they sat there, the wind blew over the fields and she gave a slight shiver. She didn't complain, but he knew she was cold. He opened up his jacket and let her into it to shield her from the wind. She pressed against his warm body and closed her eyes as if she were attempting to sleep. He sighed. Am I making you uncomfortable? She asked. He shook his head. No, I'm just worried. She opened her eyes. There's no reason to be afraid. Sasuke isn't weak. In fact, he may be able to handle Orochimaru on his own now. Izumi looked up. Look at the stars, Itachi. He looked up. Every night, I used to sleep by my window. I would look up into the sky and find the brightest star. And I used to believe in my heart that you were looking at the same one. In that way, we could be connected, no matter how far we were. He stared down at her. From now on, every night, I will look for the brightest star in the sky for you. She leaned forward and kissed him. Time would pass, and they were too tired from their trek there, so they decided to camp out for the night to gather their strength. Izumi was just glad that Itachi was sleeping. He looked like he needed it. And so she let him sleep as long as he wanted. Eventually, though, as the sun rose higher, he sat up. Good morning, she said to him. He smiled. We should get moving. If we don't hurry, people will start missing us. He stood and put his jacket back on. He led her back toward the village. For a few more hours, they continued on their way until they reached Konoha. The sun was already starting to set. He looked out over it in a longing fashion. She looked to him. Let me clear your name. I can. I will. He shook his head. There's no use. Not until... Suddenly he fell to one knee, coughing violently. Startled by this, she came to his side. She saw blood dripping from his hand. Itachi, that's blood. Are you okay? He looked at her, wiping his mouth and spitting into the grass. I'm fine. Don't worry. She looked at him with fear in her eyes. That's not fine. Tell me, what's wrong with you? He looked down. I'm sick. She came closer to him. What? He looked back. Izumi, I'm sick. She was befuddled for a moment, listening to him say that. What do you mean, sick? With what? How badly? He looked to her. Remember all those years ago when I told you that divine punishment would find me for what I had done? She shook her head. Don't talk like that. You'll be fine. We just gotta get you to see a doctor. He shook his head. No, that won't work. I've already been to one. It won't help. Tell me you can beat it. He looked to her. I need Sasuke to kill me fast. If he doesn't, he won't get the chance to. She shook her head. No, you don't have to die like that. If you have to die, you must die surrounded by the people you love. You have to die in my arms. He again shook his head. She grit her teeth as tears streamed down her cheeks. Damn it, I'm supposed to die first. I'm supposed to die in your arms after a long life well lived, after burying your child, just like in my dream. He looked to her and kissed her forehead. Life isn't a dream, Izumi. No matter how much we want it to be one, we'll often be disappointed, and that's okay. Something isn't beautiful because it lasts. It's beautiful because it doesn't. Now, return to the village. She shook her head. No, not without you. He smiled and cast her under genjutsu to put her to sleep for a few minutes. He would leave her alone. She would then wake up to the fluttering of moths and the light of fireflies. She would grunt angrily as she would roar to the skies at the unfair fate that kept ripping away everything she loved, getting her hopes up only for nothing to show from it. She would sit there and cry for the longest time. It would be moments like this that she would try and be strong for Itachi and Sasuke, but neither Itachi nor Sasuke were here right now, and there was nobody to be strong for her. Her body shook with sorrow as she cried all the tears she had stored up. When she finally calmed down, it was well into the night. She rose to her feet and began to make her way to the village. She jumped from rooftop to rooftop. Below, the voices of those enjoying the night could be heard. The village was alive with people enjoying the end of a hard day's work. She didn't see this though. To her, the village, even the entire world, seemed darker. Her light was in jeopardy. She was about to have her world turned upside down and nobody saw it. Not that she expected them to, but it was at this moment that she felt truly alone. She came into her home through the window and sat on the sill for a moment, half inside her apartment, half outside of it. She just sat there, thinking, tears coming to her eyes again. She looked up to the skies and saw the brightest star. She knew that somewhere, somehow, Itachi was looking at it too. She wanted to be with him so badly. She considered abandoning the village and joining the Akatsuki just to be with him. It's not like this village held anything for her anymore. She could go to any village with him, so why stay? That night, she had a very hard time falling asleep. When she eventually did though, she had the same dream she always had. Her and Itachi spending their golden years watching the village expand and grow, holding their grandchildren and her eventually passing away of old age in his arms. The next day, she realized that this too was a dream. Going into work, the other shinobi stated that she looked like a train wreck. She would smile weakly and say she felt like it. They asked how much she had partied the night before, and she said probably a bit too much to avoid drawing suspicion. It was then that she learned that not only had the Akatsuki kidnapped Gaara, Kazekage of the Hidden Sand, but Naruto had returned to the village, and had been sent out after him to rescue him alongside Sakura and Kakashi. This mission did not turn out the way that they had hoped. Gaara had survived, but only barely through the sacrifice of Chiyo and her technique. After Team 7's return, they would report the rumors that Sasori was planning to meet with Orochimaru at the Tenji Bridge. She knew that this was old news by now, but still she kept quiet as the mission was ordered by Tsunade. Of course, this mission ended with failure as Team 7 hit a dead end. Naruto and Sakura would return depressed, not having been able to find their friend. Izumi couldn't help but wonder if things might have been different had she just let them go instead. Maybe they would have brought Sasuke home. Maybe they too would have failed. There was no way of knowing for sure, not now. Even still, the Akatsuki, having after kidnapped Gaara, were marked as public enemy number 1, and orders came straight down from the top that they should try to find the Akatsuki and bring them to justice. She recognized that this was her best chance to find Itachi. She would meet with the Akatsuki members and defect to their side just to be with him, just to be with Itachi. But as she went, she could not find any of them. She had heard about them when they killed Asuma Saratobi. She grew angry when she saw the face of Konohamaru, but at the same time she knew that so many other faces like that had been made during the war. Her face was like that when the Nine Tails was unleashed. Her face would soon be like that again. Until then, she just wanted to be with him. She wanted to spend whatever time they had left together in his arms. Hidan and Kakuzu would be defeated and practically killed. Word eventually came down that Orochimaru was killed, Sasuke having murdered him once he realized that there was nothing else to learn. They knew that now was their best time to find him. He would be on the hunt for Itachi, another one of their targets. If they could find one or the other first, it would work perfectly for them. Izumi practically begged Tsunade to let her on the mission, claiming that she had a deep connection to both Sasuke and Itachi and should be able to help locate them. She told her that she had the Sharingan and that nobody knew Sasuke and Itachi like she did. This convinced Tsunade to add her to the roster of Shinobi. She was grateful to have this chance. She would rush the search party and follow them into the forest. As she jumped through the trees, she could only imagine what would happen. The moment she found Itachi, she would tell him that she wanted to join. Her time came when she was alone. She found Itachi. She was so pleased to see him, though he was but a crow clone. She looked to him. Itachi, I'm so glad I found you. Please, let me follow you. I want to come with you. I don't care if I'm ostracized from Konoha. There are plenty of villages for us to live in. I know you're dying, but I don't care. I will sacrifice everything just to have one final day with you. He looked to her and spoke. It's already too late, Izumi. She looked up in fearful confusion. I can barely stand anymore. As we speak, I'm having to rest in a chair, just from using this crow clone, and Sasuke's going to be here any moment. I feel if he doesn't get here in the next hour, I might not be around for him to kill anymore. She shuddered at that last sentence. No, please, let me come to you. He shook his head. No, it's best that you just stay away, for your own good. She shook her head. No, I want to be there when you die. I want to be there for you. I don't want Sasuke to kill you. You don't know what you're doing to him. You're going to destroy him. He'll hate the village forever. Itachi stroked her head. I already thought of that. He summoned Wotan to her side. Wotan has the eye of my dear friend in it. It possesses an ability that will bid anyone with my eyes to protect the village. Its last prerogative. Once the ability's cast, destroy the crow and the eye. It can't fall into the wrong hands. She looked at him in confusion. Why your eyes? She asked. When I die, Sasuke will likely take my eyes to gain access to the eternal Mangekyo. By that time, I suspect that the truth will have come out and he'll want to destroy Konoha. Find him. Let Wotan cast the Genjutsu over him. Let him return to Konoha with my head as a hero. She began to cry. I don't want you to die alone, surrounded by hatred. I want you to feel loved. He poked her forehead gently. I already feel loved. I'll see you later, Izumi. He dispersed into crows. Her body shook with raw emotion as she felt her stamina supercharged. How she knew where she was going she was clueless about, but she followed her instinct. That led her to the Uchiha hideout. She looked up and saw the battle. She saw black and red flames, lightning dropping from the sky. She saw snakes and a massive crimson Susanoo. She knew that she had to hurry. She found Team Hebi waiting outside. They turned around and readied to fight. Her Sharingan gave them a start though, as she merely ran past them, full of determination. Hey, wasn't that the woman Sasuke mentioned? Suigetsu asked. Before she could make it in though, the lumbering form of Kisame appeared in her path, holding the as of yet bandaged Samehada. She demanded to be let through, but Kisame refused. He stated that Itachi had specifically told him not to let anyone through to disturb the battle. Jugo would chime in. That's what Sasuke told us. Kisame stood there and looked at them. Then we're at an impasse. We can all fight or die, or we can just wait until the victor returns with the spoils. I'm fine with either though. It frustrated Izumi. She wanted to get through, but the moment she tried, she knew that she would get slaughtered. She did the best thing she could think of at the moment. She sent a signal flare into the air to let Konoha's forces know. Kisame looked up at it and his smile turned to shock, and Team Hebi saw it and immediately knew what she had done. Younger and less sure of themselves, Hebi almost seemed to panic, each one debating whether to run away or fight. The same with Kisame. However, before Konoha appeared, there was a lull, a silence in the battle above. Kisame and Hebi took that to mean that the battle was decided, and all that there was left to do was wait and see who won. Kisame would leave the area, as would Hebi, leaving Izumi to enter alone. She ran through the corridors and up the stairs. She continued to run until she reached the top. There, she stepped out onto the broken and damaged battlefield. At first, she didn't see anything. She looked around. "Sasuke! Itachi!" she called out. She would eventually spot something. She ran over. Laying headfirst against a wall was Itachi's bloodied remains. She bit her lip as she rolled him over. He didn't seem to have any deep physical wounds, nothing to suggest that he had been stabbed or sliced or severed. For a moment, she hoped that maybe he was still alive. She rolled him over in her arms and looked into his sunken and dark eyes. She raised the lids to see if his pupils would dilate with light, but was startled to be met with only the empty sockets. His beautiful eyes were gone. The windows to his soul were gone, and his soul along with it. She grit her teeth, seeing that the love of her life was gone. In that moment, something changed in her deeply, and her eyes turned into those of a Mangekyo Sharingan. She wailed and cried out like a child whose pet kitten had been killed by a buggy. The Konoha search party would appear, Sakura and Naruto there as well, watching on as she continued to cry. They couldn't help but feel bad for her. Naruto was a little confused, but Sakura explained it to him. Perhaps Itachi did kill her clan, and perhaps he had betrayed the village. But coming from the position Sakura was in with Sasuke, she understood the pain. She couldn't help but cry herself, watching Izumi's tormented heart shatter. The body would be taken back to Konoha. Izumi herself was debriefed, but her depressed state kept her from answering all the questions they asked about her relationship to Itachi. Due to suspicion, they put her on house arrest, with a number of onbu surrounding her residence. She had plenty of time to think. At night, she would try to sleep, but no sleep would come. She'd be left looking into the sky at the brightest star there. She was so tired, yet she couldn't sleep. She wouldn't leave the village. From time to time, Sakura would come to visit her, bringing food, games, and other sorts of things to do to help her out. And to be honest, with Sakura in the house, it did help Izumi a little. This was the point in time she didn't want to be alone the most. She told Izumi, though, this was a hard time for a lot of people, as Naruto himself had just learned that Jiraiya was killed and was now off to train at Mount Myoboku. Sakura said it just seemed like a tragic time all around. During the days, Sakura would leave to go to the hospital for her duties as a medical nin, but during her time off, she would spend it with Izumi to help her cope, as it was with Sakura that Izumi finally cracked a smile. A fake as it was, but she did crack it. However, one day, as she was just hanging out by the window, looking out over the children playing below, she couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like to raise Itachi's child. But as she thought that, the ground shook. She looked around to find smoke rising to the surface. She stood and looked out further. She began jumping from building to building until she reached the site of the explosion. It was there that she was met with the 6 paths of pain, particularly the animal path. Its summons were attacking the hospital where Sakura was working. Izumi sprang into action, utilizing her new Susanoo to attack the beast. Every cell in her body felt like it was on fire from using the ability, but she continued to do so. She managed to defend the hospital with the help of Sakura. However, the almighty push leveled most of the village. Izumi made use of her Susanoo once more to defend the hospital and was capable of keeping it and it alone standing. However, she was spent and fell to the ground. There was nothing more she could do, her eyes crying tears of blood. It was later that Naruto appeared to face off against Pain. Sakura helped Izumi into the hospital where she would be safe from the battle outside. Izumi was walking alongside Sakura when suddenly she hit the wall. She grabbed her stomach and vomited into the nearest trash can. She then fell to her knees and passed out against the wall. Sakura, in a panic, came over to her side and reinforced her, holding onto her. She would then call out, "I need someone over here." A shinobi would race over to help. Sakura would calmly speak to Izumi. "It's okay. You're going to be okay. I've got you." She didn't know how long she was out. She awakened in a hospital bed to find Sakura by her side. She tried to sit up, but was too tired and fell back. Sakura asked her to stay still. Izumi would look around and ask what had happened. Sakura would state that Pain attacked and decimated the village. They had defeated him and suffered no casualties so far. They were currently rebuilding, but Tsunade was left in a coma, and Danzo, one of the elders, had taken command of the village. Izumi would once more try to sit up. "I should probably go help them." Sakura stopped her. "No, you need to be still," she said with deathly seriousness. Izumi looked to her. "What's wrong, Sakura?" Sakura would look to her. "Izumi, you puked and passed out. Do you know why?" Izumi looked at her and started to speak. "Susanoo." Sakura shook her head. "Izumi, you're pregnant." Izumi sat there for a moment trying to process it. "Since when?" Sakura shrugged. "I don't know. I would say probably about a month or so." Izumi thought back. She covered her mouth as tears streamed from her eyes. Sakura put her hand on Izumi's shoulder. "Don't worry, it's not going to be that bad. I'll even help out." Izumi looked to Sakura. She pulled her hands away from her tear-streaked face to show a smile. "It's Itachi's." Sakura was in awe at that moment. She then looked around. "Don't tell anyone that, okay? You're already in enough trouble. If they find out you're carrying his baby, they might put you in prison." Izumi's smile faded as she nodded. Sakura looked back again. "I didn't tell anyone. Just keep it quiet and be responsible." Izumi nodded. From there, Izumi took it easy. She waited as they rebuilt the village ever so slowly. Not long after Pain attacked the village, Danzo attends the 5 Kage summit, where Tobi declares war on the world. The entirety of the allied shinobi forces are gathered, and despite Izumi's condition, she joins anyway, for the simple reason of finding Sasuke, who had been accused of murdering Danzo. She didn't care to fight. At this point in time, she was focusing more on protecting her baby. But at the same time, so long as she had Itachi's crow, she needed to save Sasuke. So she began to pool her chakra differently. Quite a bit to herself, but all of her excess, anything more than she thought she might need, she gave to the baby to keep it healthy and safe during her travels. She stayed away from as much of the fighting as she could, tending to stick close to intelligence and scouts so she could tell what was happening where and guess where Sasuke might be going. The true threat was not the Zetsu though. The biggest threats in the war were the Edo Tensei, shinobi warriors that somehow were reincarnated. However, when Naruto arrived, she went to team up with him, knowing that he could protect her and would know how to find Sasuke with his new emotion sense he developed with the Nine Tails chakra mode. Sticking close to him though, she saw something she never thought she would. Walking across the ground, the arm of Pain slung over his shoulder, was Itachi. Her eyes went wide and began to overflow with tears. Naruto stepped between them to protect her. Itachi's strength proved to be quite a bit. However, as Naruto held off Pain as well, suddenly Wotan appeared and used Kodoama Tsukami on Itachi. Itachi's Edo Tensei awakened from the control of Kabuto and then sealed away Pain. Izumi met with him for but a moment. He said that he wished he could speak with her longer, but that he needed to stop Kabuto, so he proceeded to leave. She followed him though, and along the way they found Sasuke. Together they made it to Kabuto's lair. She stayed back and watched as Itachi put him into genjutsu. He spoke with Sasuke about what it was he was doing and what he had done, what his actions meant, among other things. This spurred Sasuke to desire more knowledge about what a shinobi truly was. Izumi would approach the Edo Tensei with a smile on her face. "You're here. You're alive." Itachi turned to look at her and pulled his hand gently down her cheek. She hugged him. "Itachi, I never thought I would see you again." He smiled. "So long as you live, we'll always be looking at the same star. No matter how far apart, even though one of us is dead, we will be together." She squeezed tighter. "Please tell me you're going to stay." He stroked her head. "I'm unnatural to this world. My time to live has already come and gone. It's time I see what there is for me beyond in heaven." She held him tight as his body gave off a soft glow. He spoke. "To have seen you one last time, I'm so grateful. Even though they meant to use me as a weapon, I am grateful to Kabuto. He gave me one last chance to see you and Sasuke. I will treasure this moment always until the day we meet again." Izumi's grip on him would be lost as he slipped through. She looked up at him as he flew to heaven. Perhaps this was her way of trying to make him stay? Perhaps it was selfish, but she felt the need to blurt it out anyway. "Itachi, I'm pregnant." His wispy spirit waited for but a moment so she could speak. Izumi continued. "Please, Itachi, don't leave me. I'm carrying your baby. I don't want to do this alone. I want to raise it with you. Stay with me. The dream you showed me so many years ago, the life well lived, this is our chance to do it. Please, stay with me." He smiled at her kindly and full of love. "Izumi, wherever you go, I will always be with you. I will be with you and our child both. You were a blessing to me. You brought light to the darkness, and you made my life all the more bearable. The thoughts of you kept me sane. I will always remember you and love you. Keep your eyes up and know that I will be watching you." And with that, he disappeared. Sasuke would watch this for a moment before turning and reincarnating Orochimaru with the evil releasing jutsu. Together, he and Izumi would return to Konoha, her mission completed. He left her there at her newly remade home. He would then prepare to leave. She asked if he would ever come back, but he did not answer. For a time, she waited. The war dragged on and she worried about its outcome. Not long after, as she watched the night sky, the full moon appeared, and from it what seemed to be a single Rinnegan. And in that moment more, she was in her home. Behind her, Itachi came up and kissed her cheek. He offered her a cup of tea, which she gratefully accepted. He spoke. "I'm a little nervous about being a father." She giggled. "You'll do great, Itachi." He looked out over the village. I'm thinking about leaving my career as a full shinobi. She almost spit her tea out. What? You? Leave your career as a shinobi? Didn't you want to be Hokage? He shook his head. Nah, I'll leave that for Sasuke. I'm going to remain the clan head just as father wanted me to. I'll lead the Konoha military police force and keep the peace in the village. After all, it's where our daughter will live. If I can't make the village safe for her, then how will I keep the world safe? She leaned forward and kissed him. Days would pass. Months. She'd give birth. She was left at home in bed, holding their daughter that they had decided to name Izumi. Meanwhile, Itachi was trying to wrap his head around the instructions for building the crib for their child. His Mangekyo Sharingan were active as he tried to read the instructions as if they were another language to be deciphered. He would finish and show her the crib with pride, despite there being a lot of extra pieces lying around. He would giggle. I suppose she's sleeping with us tonight. She would carry the child on her hip as she kissed Itachi goodbye. He put on his flak jacket and strapped on his forehead protector, the standard issue of the Konoha police force. She recalled feeding the child and living the life of a housewife, all while Makoto Uchiha and Izumi's own mother would hover by her side, helping her out, discussing what went on in the village that day and offering her advice. But most of the time, the three of them just spent time admiring her and Itachi's beautiful baby girl. She saw her and Itachi standing there. This time she was holding a little boy in her arms, all while their daughter rushed home to show her parents the new headband she got that marked her achievement of the rank of Genin. Itachi was so proud of her. She viewed her first mission, the first time she returned home in the hospital from injuries sustained on the battlefield. That was a tough thing to get through. She remembered the nice boy she brought home. Itachi was skeptical, and he was sure to put the fear of God into him by showing him his Mangekyo and his Susanoo. Izumi was pretty sure he cast Tsukiyomi over the poor boy too, but he didn't budge. And years later, Izumi would marry and have children of her own. Izumi would watch all of this as she and Itachi grew older. Itachi was slowly growing blind and could hardly see anymore, and Izumi's hips were causing her no end of trouble. She could barely even sweep the floor, but still, hand in hand they walked through that door, just living on love. Eventually the day came that she grew sick, and her final moments came. She was there, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and in Itachi's arms he kissed her head and stroked her hand with his thumb. Even in death, she couldn't imagine being happier. And just as she took her final breath, she awakened. The massive tree root that held her released her to the ground. The infinite Tsukiyomi. She had been freed from it. She knew this is what Madara had planned, but at the same time, despite everything, for the first time, she understood Madara. He wasn't a man who craved power for destruction. He wanted to put people into a world of dreams, where they would be happy. Madara wanted to make people happy. He got lost along the way, but deep down, Madara was still the same as all of the other Uchiha paradoxes that had ever existed. A man in love with the world so much that when it was shattered along with his hopes, he tried to glue the pieces back together again for the sake of everyone else. She smiled. Still, the world of reality, as bitter as it was, would be the world where her real child would be born. And thanks to this rerun of her dream Itachi had given her, she knew exactly what to name her. A few months later, the child was born. Izumi Uchiha. Izumi retired from her shinobi career. Every so often, Sasuke would return home to greet her. She was proud of him. He was serving his village just as Itachi would have, and better yet, he had married Sakura, so the two of them could get together quite often. And when Sakura grew pregnant, Izumi was there to help her. Izumi, despite the hardships of her life, was enjoying a life well spent. As she put the baby down to sleep, she would grab herself a cup of tea and look out into the night sky with a smile, looking at the brightest star with her Mangekyo active. She knew that no matter how far apart she was from her love, he was looking at the same star. I hope you're watching, Itachi. We love you. And that's where I plan to end it for now. I hope you enjoyed this story. I had an absolute pleasure with this one. Itachi always was one of my favorite characters. At times when I first watched through the show, I began to think he was overhyped by the fan base, but as I began to learn more about him and bought the Itachi Shindan novels, I realized that he was truly worth every ounce of hype that everyone gave him. He was one of those characters that comes around only once or twice a series and will always be one of my favorite ones, right there beside Madara, whose spot I doubt any other Naruto character could claim. Anyway, leave a comment and let me know what you thought of the story. Was there anything you would have done differently? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. And if you have any more ideas for stories like this, be sure to let me know.
Did you enjoy our video? Well, then be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi. And make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.